Welcome to O2 Coaching's Empower Your Team podcast series with your host, Chloe Caron, founder and president of O2 Coaching. As an executive coach, author, businesswoman, thought leader, and speaker with more than 20 years of experience, Chloe's USC, her unique strategic contribution, is to create a new generation of inspiring and inspired leaders by positively impacting the lives of 1 million leaders through her webinars, conferences, books, and podcasts. In this podcast series, Chloe and her guests will take you on a journey, sharing their leadership stories, struggles, successes, and learnings. The conversations will highlight practical advice and insights for leaders. Be sure to share your thoughts on this podcast series on our LinkedIn or Facebook pages. Enjoy this podcast.
So welcome, everybody. Welcome to our podcast, Empower Your Team. I am so excited to have Lisa Stedel-Smith. Did I pronounce that well, Lisa?
You perfect.
Wonderful. Yes. And Lisa is a leadership and OD, organizational development expert. You have more than 20 years in that business, if you will. You've done so many great things in the HR world, if you will, like engagement, talent strategy, program, leadership development, OD, as I mentioned, but also change leadership, compensation, so many things in HR. I think you've seen it all. Am I right?
Yeah, looking back at 20 years, which is a scary number to say out loud. It's been all over the map in the space of HR, but my real passion is when you get into the leadership and OD space.
And I'm so excited because you and I have met in a program where I was invited in your company, a program specifically for women, and you invited me to do a quick session on your USC, which we'll get to in a moment. And we kind of worked together in such a natural way, and we exchanged and we share so many things that I said, this would be amazing to have you on the podcast, because I'm pretty sure, I'm very confident that people would learn from you with those 20 years in so many areas in HR. So I'm really excited. Thank you so much for accepting to be on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. You're right. It was a very quick connection and something unexpected out of, what I thought was just giving me a quick time, you coming in to talk with some of our participants and then probably just part ways, but that's not happened. It's been fun getting to know you more.
Yeah, same here. And today our topic, which is obviously inspired from the book Empower Your Team, but one of the topics that I really wanted to dive in with you was the whole thing around, and it looks like a small topic, and yet it's a really big topic. It's the ego and how it connects with being mindful. And I thought this was an interesting topic to discuss with you because, first of all, it's not that easy. So I'm really curious to learn all about your tricks, but also what you see the impact of that on the organization because of your role. So both from a personal and organizational standpoint, I was curious to have this conversation with you. So what about the ego? What do you feel how does the ego serves us and disserves us, do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say, and as I was thinking about it and reflecting after I read some of the portion of your book on this topic, I was like, wow, the ego can be a positive thing and it can be a negative thing all at once. In some ways, the ego helps us take some steps forward that maybe we would have held ourselves back on because our ego is playing into it and we want to take that next step. And then other times I think the ego is talking us down from taking some of those steps. So maybe it depends on the kind of day the ego is having that day.
Yeah, that's true. And how much space they want to take versus, our natural self, maybe. So how do you see it play out in, let's say, in a positive way in an organization, in addition to what you said? So when you see perhaps senior leaders and the impact of the ego it has on the organization, what potentially could be an example of that ego bringing more to the organization?
I think some of the ego can help people take bold steps and say, I have something to say and I want to influence and inspire people because I feel like I have a good direction or a vision in place that I want others to follow and bring them along there as well. So that's how I think it can play a positive light for us in the organization. And sometimes I think you want some people to have more of an ego, and maybe it plays out in confidence and all of that, to take those steps forward because you believe they have great stuff to offer others, yet they hold themselves back. So you want them to twist and use the ego in the positive as opposed to holding them back, and others more naturally use it to propel themselves forward.
And when it doesn't serve us, when it really stops us, like you say, it holds us back, how do you see that manifested in maybe in you or maybe in others, obviously in the organization? How do you see that happening?
Yeah, sometimes, again, I think it's what's holding people back. All the voices in our head saying, well, and I can talk from my own experience, it happens to me often, and I know from talking to others, it happens to them often as well. It's the thing saying, well, why you? Why should people be listening to you? Or why are you the one that should take on that big role and lead others? And why would others be following? What is it that you have that you're basically saying you have and others don't, almost, and maybe stops us from taking some of those steps?
I do think that will resonate with a lot of our audience, because that little voice, it seemed like it's a little voice that speaks to us and tells us what you just said. We all have that version of that voice, and to different levels depending on the area, but we all have that. So how do we temper that voice? How do we manage that voice? How do we deal with it? How do we move forward even though we have that voice that speaks to us?
I think part of it is just being conscious that it exists and that it is playing those different roles, and what's the time we're going to listen to it and what's the time we're going to maybe not give it as much space because it's not guiding us in the way that's going to help us going forward. Like sometimes it's pushing us, but sometimes it's holding us back. And I think just being conscious of that and maybe having a conversation back. It sounds like we're having a lot of in our head conversations, but to push back a little bit and say, I'm going to take this step. And it may or may not work out as I would like, but I'm willing to go that step because I think that's where you grow, and that whole idea of having a growth mindset. And sometimes we're going to have to take ourselves out of our comfort zone to really take some of those next steps and grow.
And so saying that we're conscious about that voice or being able to hear that voice, to me, it's as if we're talking about mindfulness. It's as if we need to be mindful. Would you say that's the case? Or how can we listen to that voice and be aware of that?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, whether you call it mindfulness, conscious, being conscious of it, I think we're talking similar things. Is just be mindful, as you say, of the space it's taking and whether it's serving us or not at that point.
So what do you see in terms of the leaders that you work with? You know, those that are the most mindful, the most present. And we know when someone is present really with us, you know. How do you see them get into that state? What do you think, their tips to get into that space of being completely mindful, being completely present?
Yeah, and I guess I'm not making the full connection back to ego. I think it's just in leadership in general and being mindful of the role that we play as leaders and thinking about the impact that we're having on others is an important part of the mindfulness. And as you're leading, thinking about that broader impact that you have, I think is helpful.
So really anchoring in the impact that you're having, that you want to have, allows you to be in the moment, is what I'm hearing from you? Allows you to be mindful?
Well, I guess maybe not I don't see that as allows you to be mindful, but thinking it through before you enter into a discussion or a situation, and more, being mindful about who am I about to talk to, and what's the purpose of that conversation, and how is this conversation or this interaction that we're going to have benefiting the other people? How can you help them? But also, how is it intended to help what you're trying to manifest in the organization, if you will? So thinking of it from both sides, not just your own and what you are trying to achieve, but how you can help the others achieve what they're trying to as well.
I love that.
Or even sometimes help them discover what it is that they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So bringing that intention with you in the conversation really allows you to be mindful to you and the other, and potentially helping them, and not only there for you. I love that. I really do. I really do. So in the past couple of months, where it's been completely crazy with this pandemic, we've heard kind of different messages around being mindful, being present. In some instances, it brings us really in the moment, and then sometimes it really drives us away from being in the moment and just into the wheel. What has been in your experience in the past couple of months with the pandemic in terms of being present, mindful?
Yeah, I'm almost more thinking about, if I think about myself, just even in the last few weeks, the wheel has been spinning really fast. It's like turbo speed. My wheel has been turning. And for me, I'll say falling out of the practice of being mindful, and I'm just spinning so fast that I'm not actually thinking about what I'm doing. I'm just doing because it's all happening so fast. On the other hand, I do see leaders who are doing well at this time, and their teams that are doing well, I think are the ones where they're pausing to connect with each other more as humans, and not fall into the trap of, oh my gosh, we have to spin this wheel so fast, but recognizing the importance of, we can keep spinning, but at the end of the day, we're humans and we need to connect a bit. Or yes, we can spin for a little bit, but we might fall apart as well. And we may lose people along the way if we're not connecting with them. So, and I don't always myself, I wish I could say I'm there all the time, and I'm not. I fall out of it, but I do think those are the leaders that are doing well at the time, who are making an effort to connect and be mindful of that connection and the importance.
And how do we connect? How do we stay connected in that environment? What are the, some tips, or maybe one or two ways that you've seen that are really powerful in ways to connect?
Yeah, not always just jumping straight into work mode and what are the deliverables and stuff, and taking a moment to find out how people are doing. And in some cases, I've heard of leaders taking a step further, and they even are booking time in people's calendars, not for the people to spend time in a meeting with them or even a discussion with them, but to say, hey, you need to disconnect for a few minutes here. I'm putting it in your calendar, whether that means go take a walk or whatever you need to do, but making sure people are taking care of themselves, or you helping them taking care of themselves. Because there's all sorts of different scenarios out there right now, but a lot of us in our company are working remotely, and your work is literally right there all the time. It's just in the next room. Some people, it's right in the rooms that they normally live in. Thankfully, I have mine off to the side so I can walk away from it, but that's not the case for everyone. And when it's there all the time, it can suck you in. And sometimes you have to figure out to make some of those delineations that then can, I think disconnecting sometimes can just help people be more mindful and take a pause and reflect back on that wheel you're spinning really fast to think about what really is important and what are the priorities. I know myself, when I'm caught in the wheel, I kind of lose sight and I just keep going and going. But even if I take a break, like this weekend, I was like, I cannot work. I typically don't work on the weekends, but I'm like, I really couldn't. And then I have a fresh perspective. If I'd worked a lot over the weekend, I think I'd be lost on my hamster wheel again.
Mm-hmm. So I really love that image of a leader actually provoking that mindfulness in their team by inviting them to stop, inviting them to take a moment, booking that time in the calendar. It doesn't have to mean that we all need to do that, but it's the mindset in which that leader is to invite their team to take that moment and to be mindful and to be conscious that getting energized doesn't come from being on the wheel. It comes from stepping out and then taking a look from the outside to that. I really love that. What else? What else have you seen? I want to take some notes. What else have you seen in terms of great connections amongst teams, amongst leaders?
I guess the other thing that I'm seeing is the leaders that are taking time to bring their groups together and talk about how they're doing, and not to go super deep and psychoanalyze people, but just to find out how they're doing and really mean it. So we're not going around there, I'm okay, but saying, yeah, I'm kind of struggling today. And sometimes it takes the leader to first say that and be real and genuine about what they're experiencing. So then as you have the discussion around the table, others feel like they can say more than, yeah, I'm fine. And then others know what's going on for those people on the team. As you're working with them, you have a little more empathy for what people are going through, and find ways to work together maybe a little bit differently or with a little bit more empathy, which can go a long way, as opposed to thinking, hey, no one has any idea what I'm going through and they just keep throwing things at me, and no lifelines are out there. So I think creating the space where we can talk about how we're doing, and maybe others have some ideas that can help us along the way because maybe they've experienced something that we're going through as well.
So again, it seems to me that as I'm listening to you, that moment where we stop creates a lot of space. Strangely enough, with a little time, it can create a lot of space for people to be aware, share, and actually readjust if they need to readjust, and then be able to move forward. How do we take that time in these crazy worlds and agendas that we have? How do we create that time, even if it's little, so that we can get back and anchor back to ourselves?
And I think that's an important part of this, is just because we're saying, hey, take time and ask people how they are or whatever, whether you do it at the beginning of a team meeting or a quick touch point a few times a week, it doesn't have to take a lot of time, but it can be quite impactful. And I think it can sound overwhelming, like, oh no, now in the list of things I have to do, now I have to connect. And I've heard some leaders kind of feel that way, is like, oh, now I have another thing on my list of things to do because I got to take extra care and feeding of the team. In actual fact, I think just taking a few moments proactively can help from it being taking a lot longer when you're trying to recover from someone completely falling off or, having some bigger challenges, whether it plays out in their performance or, they're just not showing up as much as a part of the team. So in terms of how we can do it, like I said, I think it can be, quick touch points at the beginning of a meeting, depending on how big your meeting, it's probably no more than 5 minutes, but it's getting people understanding what's going on for each other. And there's even, teams where I've seen leaders say, hey, reach out to each other. So it's not all on the leaders team, but they're setting the tone and the expectation to say, we're all in this together. Hey, like so-and-so's a buddy this week, and you rotate that. Again, not a long time, but it's just, and I'm thinking more in the remote scenario. But, when we used to be in the office, you'd pass a few people in the hallway and someone would ask you how you're doing, and you have those connections. So we have to be more purposeful when we're in a virtual setting. That's my experience anyway.
It seems there's a lot in what you're saying that can potentially support the one team mindset where everybody's working in that one direction, even though they have different hats or different even divisions or streams. But it's as if what you're talking about brings people together in that direction. I'm curious to hear you more on that one team and how this can help that mindset.
Yeah, and it's funny, as I think, there's the thing we're experiencing right now with the pandemic brings a certain context, and there's a lot of things that are negative around it. But we can also see positive outcomes of what we're experiencing as well. And I reflect back on some surveying we've done with some employees, and we ask kind of like, when they look forward in their time in the organization, what is it from right now that you don't want to lose when you go forward? Mm-hmm. And it has been coming down to, there has been a stronger connection. And it's because people have been more purposeful about caring for each other and reaching out to each other. So that has been really interesting to see people doing that. And just caring about each other more as humans, as opposed to, hey, you're just a colleague and we have some deliverables and can you get me that? Can I get you that? And moving on. They're taking a moment to get to know each other. Part of it's we're seeing in each other's homes more than we would have. We're seeing, hey, those people have cats. We can have a conversation about cats if that's my thing and their thing, or just even if it's not mine, discover more about them and their life beyond, hey, you're a colleague that sits beside me doing XYZ.
It's interesting because a lot of people that I talk to say we're less in appearances, we're more in substance, and because of this environment and being in our personal lives brings a potential connection to that is what I'm hearing from you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on to my 1-minute question. You only have a few seconds to answer. That's the challenge because
okay, let's go for it.
Be inspired from within. So you and I have worked, as I mentioned earlier on, with a group of participants in your company around their USC, and you had the chance to actually write your USC, what I call your unique strategic contribution. I'm really curious for the audience to hear about what is your USC.
So mine's still a work in progress, but I'd say right now mine is to work with executives and organizations to transform cultures. And that's my big highlight of it. And it all is in the effort of, the fact that we spend a lot of time at work. And I think it should be a fulfilling experience for us while we're there.
And for you and I, building a culture or changing a culture, but really creating a culture that allows for that seems very obvious, I think, in our mindset. Like, we know that with culture A, you'll create A results. With culture B, you'll create B results. For us, it's kind of obvious. But what would you say to leaders that are more driven by numbers, more driven by the operations, and think that culture is kind of a nice to have, but maybe not the place to start? What would you tell them?
Good question. Culture sets the tone for how we interact and what we're going to accomplish together as a group going forward. So for me, I think culture is a business tool. It's a part of how you're going to accomplish what you're setting out to as a group of humans working together.
Okay, my question number 2, what is your one tip to empowering your team?
Give them space. So set a vision, give them space, listen to them. And in that space comes allowing some failure, but learning from it and helping the learning from that.
What is your one piece of advice to a leader who wants to raise their game?
So I'm going to ask you a question back. Raise what game? What is it? Their leadership game? Their business?
Love it. Love it. It could be anything, but I would say when I wrote that question, or what I have in mind is, yeah, as leaders, and you have that conversation around the USC, we sometimes underplay compared to what we can deliver or what we should deliver. And so if I'm a leader that feels a bit stuck, that feels like I could offer more, or I could be even more strategic, I could be a better leader, what would you tell them to getting there?
I guess figure out what it is you're going after and what your game is, and how can you elevate your team. And part of elevating your team is not you taking it all on yourself, but you, while you're raising your game, help others raise their game as well at the same time. So I think you could do both and serve yourself and those that work with you.
Love it. If you had to summarize leadership in 3 words, just 3 words, what would they be?
Inspiration always comes to mind for me. There has to be inspiration in that. Yeah. Vision is another one. You have to inspire towards a vision. And probably empowering others that you're working with. So inspire, vision, and empowerment. I think those 3 things together.
Wonderful. I think you've summarized the Empower Your Team book, because that's my USC, is creating a generation of inspiring and inspired leaders. So I so connect with that word, and empowering for me reflects back to the space you were talking about, giving that space for people to be their best self, so I can, as a leader, elevate my game. So it's kind of a...
And you didn't even pay me to say that, because I haven't even finished reading the book. I'm from what I've been able to read so far, I am quite drawn to get in there and read the whole thing. So I'm glad to hear.
Yeah, we haven't paid you, and I haven't given you that much to read, but just, yeah, I think it really connects together. I really want to say thank you so much, Lisa, for taking the time. Already I could imagine our audience taking some notes and jotting some tips. So I really want to say thank you. Hopefully we can meet again in that context. I know we will in other contexts.
Yes.
In that context, I would love that. If you agree, I'm sure we could learn so much more with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for all that you're helping me learn along the way as well. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.